In this presentation, I'm going to go over Bruce Bueno de Mesquita's basic forecasting model. And this is his 70% accurate static model that just kind of gives you a first cut. And I'm going to go through how to do this by using a hypothetical example. So to get started, we have to identify an issue, a specific policy choice facing a group of stakeholders, right? And so we say, okay, here's the issue we're trying to see how a group of folks is going to decide, right? And then we identify all the people who might try to influence that decision, i.e. the players. Now, in the hypothetical example, I'm going to keep it simple with just 4, but this is your first step after saying, okay, here's the issue. Let's talk about all the stakeholders, the people who we might expect to try to influence the process, whether they are formally in the government or policymaking circles or not. Then, once we have that list of players, you estimate each player's ideal policy. What outcome do they most want? Otherwise often referred to as the ideal point. Right? Through this, we'll call it their position, though, on the issue. Then you construct the policy dimensions and place the players on it according to their position. You also estimate each player's influence and salience. So these are the building blocks. These are the things that are going to get in it. And these are the things that we're going to just kind of assume in the hypothetical. Right? Normally, though, to use this forecasting model, a lot of empirical work goes into this, a lot of estimating, finding out who the stakeholders are, finding out their position, getting these pieces of information that are the inputs for the model is a good chunk of analysis that we are actually in the hypothetical we're just going to jump over it a bit. Okay, let's have a hypothetical example. And we have a policy dimension, and I'm kind of picking something kind of like Iran's nuclear policy dimension, right? And here's the question of how do we develop our nuclear program? Do we have a peaceful nuclear program, or do we create weapons, right? And for the players, actually my grandchildren's name, so I'm envisioning my grandchildren making nukes. Yep, that's a happy thought. But I got Alex, Elliot, Emma, and Henry. And just looking at this, and I went with this instead of A, B, C, D, or any numbers, because I don't want there to be an order at the beginning, right? I don't want the names to have an order to them. So, okay, let's look at the positions of all the stakeholders on this. Well, Alex wants a nuclear program to develop and deploy weapons. Alex wants to watch the world burn, or at least be able to threaten to do it. Elliot, he wants a peaceful nuclear research program, mainly for the economic benefits. Emma, Emma believes in strength. She wants to develop the capability to make weapons as a deterrent, but not necessarily make them and deploy them. Right? This is actually, for a long time, this was India's policy of, hey, we can make a nuke. We've demonstrated we can do it. Don't mess with us. Don't piss us off. Right? But we don't have nukes. We're not ready to, we're not going to be threatening to our neighbors by actually having them. And then Henry doesn't care about nukes. He just wants to trade with the rest of the world. So no nuclear program would be fine with him. He just is interested in the country going forward. And the trade with the world kind of anticipates that, hey, if they get pushback from their program, that might cut off trade. And he would not like that. But he does not inherently care about the program. So what we have to do is, from this information, construct a policy dimension. And you start by saying, okay, what are the two extremes, right? So we're going to rank order the ideal policies. And I think it should be clear that Alex and Henry are the polar opposites, right? Henry doesn't really care about nukes. Alex wants the weapons. Then in between, we have, I think, Elliot, who wants a nuclear research program mainly for the economic benefits, and Emma, who wants to have that program and develop the capability to make weapons. So now here are our policies, right? And we give we start out, we assign numbers here, right, for the position. So Henry's at one end, so he's going to get a 0. Alex is at the other end, he's going to get 100. And then we've got to kind of estimate the middle range. And when you have more people spread along the spectrum, it might help you. But we've got Elliot and Emma. And so I'm going to say that Elliot's at a 20, right? And Emma's at a 70. So we kind of have a polarization here. We have people who are in the bottom 20 and people in the top 30, and there's kind of a 50-point empty zone where no one sits, right? But this is now our policy dimension, and these are each of the players' positions. Now we move on to estimating influence. And again, we're going to pull these numbers out, but this is something where you say, all right, who is the most influential player, right? You look at these players, and it could be, you could have equally influential ones, right? But you say, who is the most influential? Notice we are not using the word power, right? But these people are the folks who have influence over the process. And so we could be estimating an individual's influence. We could be also, if we were looking in a parliamentary section or parliamentary situation, we might look at how many votes a party had if the stakeholders were parties. And although even there that doesn't translate, but the idea is we're going to get the most influential one, give that person or group of people or whatever actor we're talking about 100, and then judge everyone else relative. So just cutting to the chase here, Henry is fairly powerful. I mean, the idea here is Alex is the most powerful, right? So he gets 100, and then everyone is kind of judged off of it. Henry's second most powerful, we'll put him at 70. Emma's third at 50, and Elliot kind of lags behind at 30. And just for the record, if I was to actually be doing this with my grandchildren, Emma would be at 100, believe me. But it is totally hypothetical, right? My grandchildren do not make nukes, but let's keep moving. Okay, now here, this is not something that Bruce does, okay? And so I'm later going to have an asterisk by this, but I like to know who the median is, right? So before we're going to go on and bring salience into this equation to get, literally bring it into an equation to calculate power. But I like to know who the median influencer is. And in this group, if we look at the power, we say who has 50% of the power on one side or the other, right? Who's in the middle? And if you look at it, Emma's got 100 on one side and 100 on the other, right? Alex has 100 on the right side, and on the left side, Elliot and Henry have also 100. So Emma's in the middle. So we say, look, Emma's position, if we just went off of influence, we would expect Emma's position to prevail, that she has the median position in this decision-making group. So we tend to think of that one as being likely to succeed. Now, we haven't brought in salience yet, so this is not one of Bruce's predictions. I think of it as an intermediate step. I'd just like to know, all right, where do people sit? And let's identify this person as potentially being the, based on influence, potentially being the deciding, or the policy position. Like I say, though, is Emma actually going to try, right? She is in the best position, but is she actually going to try to get an outcome? So that means we've got to bring in salience. So we estimate salience, and this is an estimate of how much each player or each of the players cares about the issue versus being on the winning side or getting political credit, right? Do you really want that issue, or are you, would you be more interested in credit? This is how to kind of perceive it amongst politicians. And, or we could just say, how much do you actually care about the issue versus other issues that you might be more interested in? So let's just say, based on, an analysis of each of these people, there's not an algorithm here. You just assign, an estimate on a scale of 0 to 100. And it's really the relative values that's important here, right? So Henry and Elliot are fairly big on this issue. They like their money, and this is a core issue for them. Emma, very low salience. Emma's low salience. Alex is meh, a little less than Elliot and Henry, but still fairly important to him. And so these are the saliences. And we're going to use the saliences to calculate the power that each player has, right? So here we are going to calculate the power, and it's basically power equals influence times salience, right? So now we have all the numbers, and so I'm just going to go through these, how much power does each player have? Well, Henry, we just take his influence 70 times his salience 90, we get 6,300. And in parentheses, I've got a running tally because we're going to be interested in where the median power is. Okay, so if I fill in the rest, right, Elliot's 30 times 80, you can see that it's arithmetic here. We can pretty much, I think you can get that. This is the total, right? And we notice that there's a total of 17,200, right? The running tally, that's what it goes up to. So the total power is 17,200 divided by 2. And we know the median lies at 8,600. So which player has 8,600? Well, Elliot, right? We see that Elliot at 87, he goes, well, his position here is basically 6,300 to 8,700. And so the median lies in his range there. So Elliot is the median power position, right? And so we come with our first prediction, actually, according to BdM's model, the median power prediction is that Elliot is going to prevail, right? Not necessarily the median, because of course, Emma just doesn't have the salience to really try and will make compromises and that sort of thing. And so is not really going to be fighting hard to maintain it, whereas Elliot is, and Henry, is on his side too. So this is our first prediction. Now, the next prediction is the weighted mean. And here we get a little more complicated math, right? To calculate the weighted mean, we sum up for all players their influence, salience times position, right? And then we divide it by the summation of all the power, right? And so the influence times salience, right? And that's what that formula right there says, for each I to n, I to equals 0 to n, and there's the n, here's 4. What do we got? So to do this, I've constructed this handy little table where I've listed the players, and I've listed them from based on their position, right? Even though that's the third column, I ordered the columns because it's influence, salience, position, so I ordered it that way. And you can just see, just follow it across. The first 3 columns are just the estimates of the characteristics of the player, right? And then the third column is the calculation of interest times salience times position, right? Where they are, and it's kind of where their mountain of power is, right? So it's not just their power, but it's also where they want to be on that policy spectrum. Then the final column is what we just calculated in the previous slide, interest times salience. That's the power, right? And basically we sum each of the columns up there, right? So the I times S times P column sums up to, it doesn't matter what it sums up, it's 853,000. The power, the summation of everyone's power is 17,200. We already knew that. If we divide 1 by the, we get 49.59. I rounded it to 50, right? So that is now the weighted mean, right? Prediction for here that the position that will be picked will be at 50, right? Now notice before the median, we'd said Elliot would prevail at 20, but there is a power, there is enough power on the others amongst Emma and Alex to force a compromise, is basically what we're getting here. That the model is saying, all right, we expect based on the weighted mean of, considering power influence, the prediction here is a 50, right? So that's our second prediction. Now, looking at them all, right? I reproduced, I kept that chart, that table handling. Really, honestly, if you go, that table's probably not a bad way of doing things, right? Because you just go to it and you can get everything from it. You might order it differently, I don't know. However, our median influence prediction, which really isn't a prediction in Bruce Bueno de Mesquita's world, was a 70. That Emma's in the median position when we just consider position and influence. So this is kind of a partial, right? And so this is before salience is taken into account. We think Emma's position would win. However, when we factor in salience to do a median power prediction rather than a median influence prediction, we see that Elliott's position prevails. But then when we do the weighted mean prediction, we see that the compromise would be a 50, right? So that's the compromise position. And the prediction that, according to Bruce, is 20 to 50, right? That's according to his forecasting model, and in his experience, this is right about 70% of the time. This is your initial idea that, hey, we expect the outcome to be somewhere between 20 and 50. And I just like knowing where the median is for analysis. And let's talk about the analysis, right? What can we say about this? Well, when we look at it, we say, Alex is the most influential, but his position's extreme. And he has a little bit tepid salience. He's not totally committed. He's not going to put all his power behind fighting this. He is willing to, it's not a make or break for him. He's not going to go down in a blaze of glory. Emma is in the median position, but has, relatively low salience. She's not bad on power, on influence rather, but her low salience gives her the least amount of power here. Henry and Elliot, on the other hand, they're high salience and relatively high combined. Combined, they have as much influence as Alex, but it's the salience. They care, especially Henry, right? Henry really cares. So if you look at the last column, Henry's power is 63 on this issue, which taking into account his salience, and he's got a 6,300, whereas Alex, who has the most influence, he's not that much far off, right? So the imbalance in salience kind of levels the playing field between Henry and Alex, but Elliot is in there with a fair chunk of power to lend in and is actually going to be able to get more of his position, right? He's going to do better than a lot of folks here. And we're going to get a 50, right? We're going to get a 50, which is, actually, it's 20 off of Emma and 30 off of Elliot. So Emma's not doing too bad in here either. But this is how we can analyze this thing. We can say, look, in any kind of negotiation or any kind of decision making, Henry and Elliot's high salience is going to combine to drag the decision down in their direction. And so we are, in fact, going to get a compromise, even though at first blush you might look and say, well, Alex is the most influential, right? These other folks do have an impact on the process. So that is how we make a prediction. And that is also a little taste of how you look at these numbers and go, okay, this is what's going on. And I think when people read Bruce Bueno de Mesquita's Predictioneer's Guide, he talks about, well, the model predicts this and the model predicts this. Well, and this is what I think he's doing. He's interpreting it. He says, hey, the model predicts that Henry and Elliot's high salience is going to make them force a compromise, right? That's what we're seeing here. So that's a very quick introduction to how to do the forecasting model. It does not include the game theoretic model that talks about what if people negotiate and positions change. That will give you a very different prediction. But this is the 70% solution. And I think it offers a lot of analytic leverage. You're able to say a lot about a decision-making situation just based on this. But it does, always want to remember, we skipped over a lot of empirical work that you would have to do to determine who are the stakeholders, what is the issue dimension based on the range of positions those stakeholders, those players would want, and then we'd have to estimate the influence, salience, and we already have position. We also need the influence and salience of each of them. But once we have that, it becomes fairly straightforward to do this analysis, and I think you chop and chips fly.